Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Dan. You may have realized that I have not posted on this channel for about 2 years. That is because I got caught up in college and internships and a bunch of other stuff, but this semester is looking a little bit lighter, so I'm hoping to return to making YouTube videos on this channel. So hopefully I can do that. Now, there is a video I've been meaning to make for a while on a film that's been like really impactful for me that I've watched in the past year, but I didn't want to make that my first video back because I kind of wanted to get back into the swing of things. So that's probably going to be the next video if I can figure out how to make it in a format that's not going to be literally an hour long because I have a lot to say. But before I made that video, I wanted to make this video at the beginning of the year talking about the films that I watched in 2024 and going over all of my 5-star and 4.5-star watches. So for the past year and a half, I've been keeping film journals where I write every film that I watch, where I watched it, director, date, runtime, and then I also put a little section at the bottom with the standouts in my opinion of the film, and then I do little drawings that correlate to the film. And this has been really fun. It's really cool to go back and look through all the films that I've watched, but it's also helped me have a medium for keeping track of my ratings of films. And the way I rate films isn't all that exact. You could probably show me a film I rated 3.5 stars and a film I rated 4.5 stars. And depending on what films they are, and without the stars associated to them, I might tell you I like the 3.5 one better just because I'm so inconsistent with it, dude. But generally I try to do 5 stars is a movie that genuinely impacted my life and I think is really good and really relatable. It's hard for a movie to get 5 stars if there's not something that's personal to me. And I know that's not the most objective ranking, but that's how I do it. So then 4.5 stars would be something that is objectively really, really good, but maybe doesn't hit that 5 star to me, or maybe it is deeply personal and relating, but there's something technical about it, or there's something maybe artistically that I don't quite agree with that made it short of that 5 star, but overall still a really good movie. When you get down to 4 stars, that's yeah, I like this movie, it was good. 3.5 stars would be it was pretty good, I enjoyed it, there were aspects of it that I enjoyed, maybe not my favorite. 3 stars to me is pretty mid-tier, it was okay, nothing notable, nothing great. When you get down to the lower stars, it's a little bit more just kind of how I'm feeling at the moment. If I watch a movie and I think it's really bad, I don't know if I'll give it half a star or if I'll be feeling nice that day and give it 2 stars because it's not the worst movie I've ever watched, but kind of depends. So with all of that out of the way, I'm going to start diving into my 5-star watches of 2024. So in 2024, I only actually had 4 5-star watches. I'm really stingy with my 5 stars. A movie really has to blow me away to get a 5-star rating. And the first film I want to talk about absolutely deserves this 5-star rating. I would give it higher than 5 stars if I could, and it's also the movie that I'm going to do a full video on next, hopefully. But that film is one that I watched independently during last spring's finals week, and it's called All of Us Strangers. It's directed by Andrew Hai. It came out in 2023, and it is 105 minutes long. And this movie basically follows this lonely screenwriter in London. His name is Adam, and it follows him as he kind of navigates 2 different relationships, one of them being with his long-dead parents, and one of them being with a new neighbor of his named Harry. So throughout the film, we see Adam confront his parents who had died when he was 12, but he is revisiting them as an adult in kind of a pseudo-ghost/dreamlike format. It's not 100% clear what these parents are because obviously they're not alive still and they're not real, but in his ability to confront them again as an adult, he has several gut-wrenching and incredible conversations with them about their parenthood, their treatment of him as a child, their expectations for him, his queer identity. That's a big part of this movie, is that Adam is queer and or he is gay, I guess, and that's something that his parents, having had him in the 80s, aren't that great about at first. So he has some really tough conversations with them, where he tries to kind of work past that kind of generational understanding and divide in order to kind of heal his childhood self. Interspersed with this, we see Harry get to know Adam, the neighbor that knocks on his door drunk out of his mind one night, and they have a nice intimacy that forms and a nice relationship that forms where Adam is able to tell Harry about his past and about how the loss and the queerness and the grief have kind of all culminated together into one feeling of just like being deeply alone. So I don't want to spoil too much of this movie because I am going to be doing a whole video on it. But that's kind of the general basis of the plot. It kind of alternates between these two relationships, and we see Adam as he evolves in his self and his sense of identity and his ability to open up to other people. So now that we kind of understand what the movie's about, I want to tell you what made me like it so much. I think it has a really cool feel and atmosphere to it. It's very slow and dreamlike. There's a big emphasis on vast open shots and landscapes, kind of to emphasize the isolation that Adam is feeling. One of my favorite parts of this movie is the dialogue. Every line of dialogue is profound in some way. Every conversation that Adam has, either with his parents or with Harry, makes really strong, solid human points that I think I really resonated with. Some of my favorite conversations that they have are Adam and Harry have a conversation about what their identity means to them and how they label themselves. And Adam growing up in the 80s, how he attaches more with the label gay versus Harry, who grew up later, I'm not sure how much later, but he attaches more with the label queer because of the way that society has shifted in their usage of those terms over the years, in such that queer was obviously used to be a slur and an insult directed towards gay people. But in kind of the early 2000s, it became more common for people to call things gay disparagingly, and that's what Harry expresses to Adam and why he feels that queer is a more apt term for himself. And then the conversations that Adam has with his parents are heartbreaking every time. I specifically think his relationship with his father and the one-on-one conversation that they have is really impactful because his father kind of is able to look back and see what his actions were raising Adam and how those have impacted him to this day. And he is able to frankly confront with his son what impact he has had on him and apologize for the negative impacts he's had on him while still recognizing the positives. And it's just deeply moving and something that I think anyone who has lost a parent or has something that they feel is unsaid between them and a parent that they wish they could have that frank, honest discussion, I think it's really, really impactful for that. And then overall, just its portrayal of queerness is really cool, and the way that it ties queerness and loneliness together, specifically in the modern age, and then also how queer identity and trauma and grief can kind of bundle all together and lead to a sense of isolation, and can lead one to block other people out and kind of cause their own isolation. And then to top it all off, the acting in this film is incredible. Andrew Scott plays Adam, and he's just such a good actor. I love Andrew Scott. And then Paul Mescal plays Harry, and their chemistry together is great. Just the depth of their characters and their emotions is incredible and adds a lot to the film. And that's all I'm going to say on All of Us Strangers right now, because I am going to do a whole video on it. So look out for that. I have many, many, many things to say. All right, so moving on from that, the next 5-star watch I had this year was for my French cinema class, actually, and it's Portrait of a Lady on Fire. So Portrait of a Lady on Fire is directed by Celine Sciamma. I don't know if that's how you pronounce her last name, so sorry if it's not. This was released in 2019. It's 131 minutes long, and like I said, I watched it in French cinema this past year, but I actually had seen it before that, I think 2 years ago, in my cinema club at college here. And when I watched it 2 years ago, I originally rated it a 4, which I don't know what I was on, because when I rewatched it, it's incredible. I love so many things about it, and I just had to give it a 5-star rating. So Portrait of a Lady on Fire follows a young painter named Marianne, who's commissioned to paint a portrait for the soon-to-be husband of Heloise. And Heloise was originally in a convent and was pulled out when her sister died so that she could then be the one in the family to be married off. This takes place, I think, in the 1700s, but I don't know about that. It's sometime in the past. Now, Heloise isn't too excited about this marriage, so she refuses to sit to be painted. So this means that Marianne has to pretend to be her walking companion and study her intensely on these walks, and then go back and try to paint her from memory. While they're doing this, Marianne grows closer to Heloise, so when the portrait's finally done and she reveals her true motivations to Heloise and shows her the painting, it's a really big betrayal of trust. And then Heloise goes on to say that doesn't look like me, and clearly like you don't know me too well. And that really hits Marianne because they have been like getting so much closer. And also I'm sure she's very particular about her art. So she ends up actually destroying the first painting, which means she has to stay longer and do another painting of Heloise. But this time Heloise agrees to sit for the portrait. During the second portrait painting, the two grow even closer and they form an intimate relationship. And then eventually, once the portrait's over, Heloise has to go off to Milan and get married off, and Marianne has to continue her work as a painter. And unfortunately, like most historical movies about lesbians, it does not end well. So, what I like a lot about this film is the themes that it explores. There's a lot about the observer versus the observed and how that relationship can create a power dynamic. Whereas in the first painting that Marianne is making, she very much has all of the power as the observer of Heloise, and she's projecting kind of her perspective onto Heloise in making this first portrait. And that's why Heloise sees it and says, like, is that really how you see me? That's like nothing like me. Whereas in the second portrait, they kind of have a more equal relationship, where Heloise starts speaking up and saying the things she's observing about Marianne as Marianne's painting it. So they establish this kind of mutual connection that allows Marianne to paint a more accurate and full painting of Heloise. There's also just incredible coloring and cinematography in this film, coloring specifically with like the costuming, and then also just like the landscapes and setting, specifically all of the scenes with the ocean and the cliff sides are really good. The scene of the bonfire, where the kind of title of the film comes from, is really pretty and really well lit. And there's also really good cinematography, and specifically in the ending scene, Marianne is seeing Eloise at an orchestra performance, and the camera just kind of takes Marianne's perspective and slowly zooms in on Heloise as she's just deeply emotionally reacting to this song that reminds her of Marianne. And then as it gets closer and closer to her face and is really zoomed in, the camera kind of follows the slight movements of her head in a way that's really intimate and makes you feel like you are Marianne, like staring down Heloise in this moment. There's also a really powerful scene in this movie when the housemaid Sophie discovers that she's pregnant, and Eloise and Marianne have to help her get an abortion, which obviously set in the 1700s is a very big difficulty. So Eloise and Marianne end up taking Sophie to this woman who's local, and she ends up performing some sort of abortive procedure. I'm not 100% sure what, but there's a really beautiful shot with Sophie laying down on the bed, legs spread apart, while the woman performs the abortion. And she's laying there with the woman's two kids on either side of her, kind of there to comfort Sophie in this moment and show that while Sophie is not ready to have a child right now, that is not like a reflection on her thoughts on children, and that maybe one day she will want to be a mother, but this is a choice that she has to make in this moment. And then also in that scene, there's a really important part where Marianne tries to look away from Sophie when she's having this procedure done, and Eloise like taps her on the shoulder and says, "Look," which I think ties in really well to the film's themes of observation and looking at something as a way to remember it, as a way to capture it, as a way to make it real. Another major point of this film that makes me like it so much is how much it references the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. I don't know how to pronounce that to be so real, but I'm going to say Eurydice. Actually, you know what? I think it's Eurydice. I don't know Greek. But anyways, at one part of the film, they're reading the story aloud. And if you don't know the story, I'm going to do a really bad job of explaining this. You can look it up. But Eurydice gets taken to the underworld for some reason. I don't know why. But Orpheus goes to try to rescue her. And the deal made is basically like he has to take her out of Hades into the normal world. But he cannot look back at her until they are back into the normal world, or she will go back to Hades. At the climax of the story, they're both walking, and Orpheus, right before entering the world, decides to look back at Eurydice for the memory of her, and she goes back to Hades and he loses her. So what's interesting about this is hearing the different characters' takes on his decision. Marianne explains that she sees Orpheus's choice as the choice of the poet and not of the lover. That choosing the memory of something or someone is kind of the poetic and artistic choice versus choosing to have the person but not look. This story is paralleled really well in Marianne and Heloise's relationship, specifically when Marianne is leaving for the last time. As she's approaching the door to leave, Heloise comes up behind her and says, "Look." And Marianne looks back at Heloise, and it's the last time they see each other. And in that moment, they are Orpheus and Eurydice. And additionally, by telling Marianne to turn around and look at her, Eloise kind of takes that choice off of Marianne's shoulders and says, "I know that you are choosing the memory of this moment over actually having me by leaving right now. And I don't want you to feel that you have the burden of that on your shoulders. So I'm going to prompt you to look around and make you make the choice of the poet, because I know that in your heart that is the choice you want to make." So speaking of French cinema, my next 5-star watch was also a French movie. I'm so sorry that 2 out of my 4 5-star watches for the past year were French movies, but I was in French cinema. But this third movie I watched in French cinema, it wasn't actually a part of our syllabus. It was for a project where you could select what movie you wanted to watch. So it's called Portrait d'une jeune fille de la fin des années 60 à Bruxelles, which means Portrait of a Young Girl at the End of the 60s in Brussels. Really long title, really straight to the point title. But this movie is by Chantal Akerman, who's a French filmmaker. Came out in 1994, and it's only 62 minutes long because it was actually made for like a TV series. Not like a TV show, because it was like a series of films that filmmakers were commissioned to make. And in Portrait of a Young Lady, it follows this young girl, Michelle, as she kind of ditches school and goes about the city for the day. And as she's at the cinema, she meets this boy named Paul, and she and Paul kind of walk around the city and talk about sex and love and life and existentialism, kind of your typical French New Wave style conversational film. But what makes this film interesting is that Michelle very clearly is attracted to her best friend Danielle, who we see only a few times throughout the film. And she kind of explains to Paul, like, "I only really kissed you in the cinema so that I could tell someone about it later." And then later in the film, we see her talking to Danielle, and she tells Danielle about it. So it's kind of an interesting exploration of the idea of compulsive heterosexuality. And it's not fully stated explicitly in the film whether Michelle is gay or bisexual or if she's actually straight, and like I was just reading into this, which I don't think is the case. But despite Michelle's feelings for Danielle, she walks around the city all day with Paul, and eventually they go back to an apartment, and it's implied that they sleep together. And then Michelle takes Danielle to a party, and the party scene is kind of one of the ending scenes, but it's also kind of one of the most interesting scenes in the film. So Michelle and Danielle are at this party together, and they're doing this kind of dance where everyone is spinning around in a circle, and then 2 people are in the middle dancing together, and then one of them goes back into the circle, and the one that remains gets to choose someone else to come back into the circle and dance with them before going to the circle, and then that new person gets to pick another person. So it's kind of like a fun little relay thing. But we see Michelle in the center looking around like at everyone, and she eventually picks Danielle to come dance with her, and it's like all fun until Michelle has to go back into the circle, and Danielle picks some boy to come dance with her. And you can see kind of the distraughtness on Michelle's face. She's realizing that she probably can't act on this attraction that she feels. So then at the end of this party, she ends up walking with Danielle across this field. And then once they get to the other side of the field, Michelle leaves Danielle there to go off and meet with Paul. And Michelle turns around and leaves because she's decided kind of that there is no point pursuing this relationship with Danielle, and that Danielle would be better off with Paul. What draws me to this film is mainly its themes and the way it explores feminism and also lesbianism and compulsive heterosexuality. I also am a big fan of the French New Wave, like conversationalist dialogue and character driven films. If you're not a big fan of that, you probably won't like this movie because there's not a whole lot of plot. It is mainly focused on dialogue and learning about these characters. I find the character of Michelle particularly fascinating because while she reveals so much about herself and her worldview through her dialogue with Paul, but you can also tell that there is something that she is keeping guarded and that she will not tell you and will not tell Paul especially. And she kind of won't even tell herself it. She won't even admit it to herself. Chantal Akerman also in this film used a lot of just really raw feeling footage. She kind of just went out into the streets of Brussels and filmed. So sometimes you can see like extras will like look at the camera because they're not part of the filming shoot. She literally just went out into the city and filmed real life, which makes it feel very naturalistic and real. She also used this technique called anachronism. Big fancy word, just means that there are aspects of things in the scene that don't fit with the time period that the film is supposed to take place in. So it's supposed to take place in the 60s, but in one scene they visit like a record store and there's CDs everywhere. CDs were not a thing in the 60s, but it kind of adds to the idea of this being less of an important, like, you're not supposed to think it's real. You're supposed to see it as a film and as an expression of Chantel's inner thoughts and how she saw her childhood and her growing up. And while I keep saying that I like the new wave style of this film, it does depart from the French New Wave in some very important ways. French New Wave films tend to be very like male centric, and often the woman will be portrayed as kind of just like an object of desire that the men are trying to like chase. But in this film, it really isn't like that. It focuses so much more on the female body, and specifically the female body within the urban setting and how Michelle's character relates to the city around her, which I think is really interesting. All right, so my last 5-star rating of 2024 is Stand By Me, which we watched in Cinema Club. So Stand By Me was directed by Rob Reiner. It came out in 1986 and it's 89 minutes long. And this film follows 4 young boys as they set off on an adventure to try to find the body of a kid that went missing that was reported in the local papers. And along the journey, they face a series of obstacles while also having very heart-to-heart conversations with each other and learning about each other's home lives and their struggles and their dreams and aspirations. There's a specific focus on the relationship between Chris and Gordy, as Chris kind of encourages Gordy to pursue his dreams of becoming a writer, despite the lack of confidence that he feels in himself. And generally, this movie just has a really heartwarming portrayal of youth and the importance of companionship and connection and encouragement. And the portrayal specifically of Chris and Gordy's friendship just gives such a positive portrayal of young male friendship that I think is really important and really nice to see it coming out of a movie from like the 1980s when there was kind of more of an idea of toxic masculinity in the general cultural zeitgeist. But their relationship is really tender and really grounded, and you can tell that they really, really care for each other, and it's just a beautiful portrayal of the tenderness of boyhood. All right, sorry if the lighting changed, guys. I went and got dinner real quick. So now I'm going to try to speed through my 4.5-star watches. I'm not going to go as much into detail into these just to make this not an hour long. So my first 4.5-star watch from last year was Anatomy of a Fall by Justine Triet. It came out in 2023, and it's 152 minutes long. It is about an author whose husband falls from the attic, and she is suspected of murder, and she has to try to prove her innocence, basically. And I just think the acting is really good, and I think that the way that they handle the theme of guilt and innocence is really fun, especially the way they kind of leave it ambiguous and up to the viewer at the end. The next 4.5-star rated film from last year is Before Sunrise, which is directed by Richard Linklater. It's from 1995 and it's 105 minutes long. And it follows Jesse and Celine, these two people who meet while traveling alone on a train. And Jesse convinces Celine to get off the train with him in Vienna, and they kind of explore the city and talk until they part ways in the morning. I really like this movie because I really like dialogue and character driven movies, and I think this movie does that really well. And I also really like the way that it incorporates the city of Vienna as almost its own character based off of how much of a presence it has in the movie. Next is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which was directed by Michael Gondry in 2004, and it is 108 minutes long. So in this movie, we follow Joel, who discovers that his ex-girlfriend Clementine has had him and their entire relationship erased from her memory. So he decides to also have the procedure to have them erased from his memory. And we kind of follow him in that process as he's going back through all of these memories as they're being deleted, and he realizes that he doesn't actually want to forget their relationship, even if it did end in failure. And in this movie, I just think the cinematography and the way that it is used to portray the non-linear storytelling and the concept of memory and remembering is really interesting. I really like there's a few cinematographic transitions between different scenes that take place like in completely different settings and completely different times, but they're like a seamless transition from one to the other. And then there's also a lot of cool things that they play with the idea of memory and kind of like blurring or distorting things in the peripherals or the backgrounds to kind of reflect how a memory would be projected. I also think the acting in this movie is really good, especially Jim Carrey. He kind of kills it. So the next movie is I Saw the TV Glow by Jane Schottenbrunn. It came out last year in 2024, and it's 100 minutes long. The plot of this one's kind of hard to explain, but it's about like these two teenagers, and they are watching the show called The Pink Opaque, and the lines between their reality and the reality of the TV show start to blur in various ways. And I think that's the only way I can describe this movie. I don't know. But the reason I like it so much is it is an allegory for transness. So I relate to it. But the director of the movie is trans, and just the way that kind of the idea of, are you going to make this step to enter this other world where you feel like you really belong, or are you going to continue to deny that of yourself and stay where you are? And that's why I rated this film 4.5 stars. It's a very heavily stylized film, I would say, with a lot of like cool shots of like different colors, and it gets surrealist at points too, which I usually appreciate, and I do appreciate. But there are a few choices they made in some of those that I was like a little bit unsure with, which is why this isn't a 5-star film. But I do think the heart of the story and the theme of it and the emotions evoked within me while watching warrant a 4.5-star rating. So the next film is Seven Samurai by Akira Kurosawa. This is from 1954, and it's 203 minutes long. It's literally 3.5 hours. And I actually went to see this in a theater, which completely added to the experience. Are you kidding me? This room packed with a bunch of film nerds in the middle of a Midwestern city watching The Seven Samurai. Love that. But this is kind of your classic epic that follows the story of a village of farmers, and they're being threatened by these bandits who are going to destroy all of their crops and steal all their stuff. And the village decides to seek 7 samurai to help defend their village from the bandits. And in this film, I just think it was so intriguing from a filmmaking perspective. The way it was made in 1954, that's mind-boggling. The cinematographic techniques that they were able to do, like literally 70 years ago, that's crazy. And also the blocking of the film is really, really cool. All of the battle scenes are just done so well and so interestingly, and it really keeps you in it for the whole 3.5 hours. And I know that's a crazy statement to make. The storyline and the plot overall is pretty like standard, but the way that they like take the time to develop the personalities of each of the samurai is really, it really gets you invested in it, and it's also a lot funnier than you would think. The next 4.5-star movie from last year is After Sun by Charlotte Wells. It came out in 2022, and it's 102 minutes long, and this follows this girl Sophie, and it's her reflecting back on a trip that she took when she was 11 with her father Callum. And it's kind of just a recollection of the time they spent together through the lens of someone looking back at their childhood, trying to connect the memories of their father with the flawed man that they now know their father to be. And the main pull of this film to me, honestly, is just the heartwarming feeling that it evokes, and also Paul Mescal's performance. He's a great actor, and I just think he plays kind of the unsure and maybe doing things wrong, but also deeply, deeply caring father so well. And you can just like you feel the positive fatherly vibes coming from the movie. And for some of us, we really need that. Now's the time of the 4.5 star ratings to kind of unfortunately return to my French cinema era. So the first one I have on here is Le Bon Air by Agnes Varda. It was from 1965. It's 79 minutes. And this movie is really interesting. So it follows this couple, Francois and Therese, and their two children, and they have this idyllic suburban life, and they go out for picnics every weekend in a field of flowers, and everything's bright and cheery and happy. But one weekend, Francois starts an affair with a girl at the post office. And this goes on for a while until Francois and Therese are going on one of these picnics, and Francois tells Therese that he has found this other happiness outside of their marriage, and that it's not a detractor from the happiness of their marriage. It's this other separate happiness outside. Our marriage is an orchard, but I found this beautiful tree down the road. And doesn't that just add to the beauty of the world and the happiness that we all feel? And in the moment, Therese is like, "Oh, yeah, that's so chillin'." But then they go to take a nap, and Francois wakes up, and Therese is drowned in the lake. And I am kind of spoiling this movie, so sorry. But at the end, Francois ends up creating basically an identical life with Emile, the lady from the post office, that he had with Therese before. And it's just really interesting as a movie because it's so bright and cheery and happy, overly so. And there's so many flowers, and the colors of the flowers and the designs on people's costumes blend together so well. And it's also in this cool like Technicolor color palette. I'll show you some examples, but it has this sinister feeling under it that's like not ever really fully addressed. Like she never expresses her anger at this situation to Francois, but in finding like you feel her anger though. Like and you feel it, and it's such a cool film. Okay, next up is a controversial choice, and it's India Song, another French film. It's by Marguerite Duras. It was released in 1975, and it's 120 minutes long. Everyone else in my French cinema class hated this movie, except for me and then this like French cinema nerd that sits next to me. If you're watching this, I'm so sorry for calling you a nerd. It's endearing. But the reason people didn't like this movie is because it's really different to like literally any other movie you've ever seen before. So basically the visuals of the movie are a series of still to nearly still shots. So like it'll be like a shot of a room and maybe incense is burning, and like it's a video because the incense is burning. It's not a picture. But there's no other movement happening. Or there will be, if there's characters in the shot, they will be moving kind of in slow motion.
Je ne savais pas que vous existiez. Calcutta est devenu pour moi une forme de l'espoir.
Sometimes they're speaking as characters, but sometimes they're not, because the audio is kind of disconnected almost fully from the video. It's loosely related, like thematically, to what's happening visually, but it's almost like someone's reading an audiobook to you as the audio track, and it has a really interesting use of sound. So it's a really creative movie. But people really didn't like it because of how slow paced it was. So a lot of people were like, "Oh, this is so boring. It was so long. Nothing was happening." But I guess I was just in the right mental state for that, because to me it was so relaxing and peaceful and just like cool to watch this work of art partake in front of me. So maybe I'm turning into some like cinephile film bro with this one, but I really liked it. I gave it 4.5 stars. So chillin' if that's not for you, but it worked for me. Okay, next, loosely still related to the French cinema class, we have Raw by Julia Ducournau. Ducournau? I don't know. Um, Ducour don't know. That was a really bad joke. I'm so sorry for that. But anyways, this movie came out in 2016. It's 99 minutes long. It's a French film. It's in French, but it's a like modern horror film in French. So it's not a French film as you would typically picture a French film. And it's about this girl who her entire family's vegetarian, and she goes off to this boarding school for people who want to be veterinarians. And her sister is also there. And this school is kind of low key occult. So they have this like hazing ritual in the first week, and they force her to eat raw rabbit liver, which gross. But she's a vegetarian, so she doesn't want to do it. But her sister makes her, and eating this rabbit liver awakens within her a desire to consume human flesh. So she kind of goes into her little cannibal era for a little bit. Until she realizes that she's not the only one. This actually runs in her family, and her sister is now a cannibal too. And I just think this movie's so interesting. The way that its main character and the setting are set up so interestingly to interact. Like the veterinary boarding school with like insane hazing rituals is a crazy setting to have this, and then having the family and having her be a vegetarian beforehand. It all of the elements of storytelling are put in place for this film to work perfectly. And the veterinary school also provides such like an interesting backdrop of like just like animals in the sense of both as a thing that we eat like as meat, but also as like an animal instinct that kicks in for her that makes her start being a cannibal, you know? Like it brings out the animalism in multiple ways. Now, I will warn you, there's a lot of graphic content in this movie. It gets gross. So if you're squeamish, it might not be for you. The girlie sitting next to me in this screening, it was a French department screening, but it wasn't for my French cinema class. I just wanted to go to it. And the girl sitting next to me was a French professor. So girl, I mean, like she was a woman. She's like 40 probably. But she was not having it. She was not a fan of the gore. She was not a fan of the blood. So every time something would come up that was like graphic, she'd be like, "Oh goodness!" And so I think that also added a lot to my viewing experience. So maybe that's why I rated it 4.5 stars. All right, next up, we're getting to some more recently released films. So we have Wicked by John Chu, 2024, 160 minutes. If you don't know, I'm not going to explain the plot of Wicked to you. Look it up. I don't know. But I'm a sucker for a movie with good set design and a good color palette and good costuming. So the combination of all of those and the way that the choreography is incredible, and the way that they choreograph the camera is also incredible. And obviously, Cynthia and Ariana, you don't need me to be praising them. Everyone's doing it. And they deserve it. They did really, really good. And I really liked this film, so I gave it 4.5 stars. And then next up, we have Honora, which was also released in 2024. It's directed by Sean Baker, and it's 139 minutes long. And it is about a young sex worker from Brooklyn who meets this incredibly rich Russian man at work, and she agrees to be exclusive with him. And then they fly out to Vegas and they get married. But then she finds out that he's actually the son of a Russian oligarch who has sent some goons over to annul their marriage. And this film was so funny. It's so unserious and so funny, but the costuming and the set design really contribute to that like fun vibe. But the highlight of this film, and I think everyone agrees, is Mickey Madison as Annie. She just acts it so well. The dialogue that she has and the humor is so funny, and it was generally just a fun film to watch. All right, I promise we're nearing the end. This is the last 4.5 star film that I watched last year, and it also came out in 2024, and it is Queer by Luca Guadagnino. This movie is 136 minutes long, and it follows a middle-aged American named William, who is also a heroin addict, and he's living a solitary life in Mexico City in the 1950s until this young man, Eugene, arrives, and kind of convinces William to try to establish a meaningful connection with someone. And then as the film goes on, we kind of consider if the connection between them is going to survive as Eugene follows William on a trip to South America where William wants to find enlightenment through taking ayahuasca. And the complication in this is that Eugene seems very guarded and unable to let himself have the connection, and he insists that he's not queer. And what really sold me on this film is the final act. After they take the ayahuasca, there's just a really cool trip sequence, and there's really cool visual effects that they do. I don't know how they did them, but it was really cool. And there's a lot of symbolism at the end there that provides a lot to read into how it connects to Eugene and William and their kind of internal mental state at that moment, specifically William more so. But the film's also really well acted. It's Daniel Craig and Drew Starkey. They both do an incredible job establishing their characters and kind of portraying their emotions. And the distinct settings are also really big in portraying the continuous change in the two men's relationship. All right, quickly, honorable mentions. We're just firing these off. Juno, 4 stars. I'd never seen that film up until last year, but I enjoyed the world building, and I thought it was cool that it had a 2000s Midwestern aesthetic to it in like kind of like the dialogue and also like props and stuff. All right, next is Superstar, a Karen Carpenter story. I also gave this 4 stars. It's actually a short film, and it's portrayed primarily by Barbie dolls, like acted out primarily by Barbie dolls. It's really hard to find a clip of this, but we watched it in my bad films class, and it was actually by director Todd Haynes, who also did May December, if you know that, and also Tangerine, I believe. But he made this in college, and I just thought it's so interesting the way that he uses the Barbie dolls in order to convey, like, it's a great medium to convey the story that he is conveying. And I think it works really interestingly, and it's really creative, so I gave it 4 stars. All right, next, number 3. We have My Own Private Idaho. I gave that 4 stars. To be so real, my favorite part of this movie was twink Keanu Reeves. He's wearing this absolutely twink-ass outfit. But also, it's him and River Phoenix, and the acting is just incredible in it. But it did take me far too long to realize that this movie is like a loose Shakespeare adaptation, kind of in the way that early 2000s movies did that. And it's based off of the like King Henry IV and V. But it took me so long to realize that, and I was like, why is the dialogue kind of strange? Because like every once in a while, Keanu Reeves will just go off to like a little Shakespearean rant, and I was like, that's weird. But once I got that, like, it's not my favorite part of the movie, but it's okay. All right, last honorable mention is The Talented Mr. Ripley. I also gave this one 4 stars. I just think it has really good character work and really good acting by both Matt Damon and Jude Law, who play the two like mainish characters. And the setting of the film is also really cool. It takes place in Italy. It also has a lot of things to say about themes of like class and identity. So after yapping to you for God knows how long about my favorite films that I watched last year, I wanted to go over 3 of my worst watches of last year real quick to get a little bit of the other side. So the first worst watch of 2024 was Birdemic Shock and Terror. I'm sure it's a huge shock by the title of this movie that I was not a fan. I ended up rating this movie half a star. It was nearly unbearable to watch. The bird shrieking that you hear makes you want to rip your ears out. I'll play you a little clip, but imagine this for like the entire 2-hour watch time. And on top of that, the plot of this movie is almost non-existent. Like nothing, I mean, things happen, but nothing really happens. And the technical aspects of the movie are also just really bad. Like the audio is horrid audio editing. I am bad at audio editing, trust me. But this is like, you had to go out of your way to make it sound this bad. The second worst movie I watched last year is Birdemic 2, The Resurrection, the sequel to Birdemic. Now, I found out that this is an unpopular opinion, but I rated this one 1 star higher than the first movie. I've heard that most people feel the opposite. And by most people, I mean out of the, like, literally 3 people who've probably ever seen this movie. But the sequel is just, like, not good From what I remember, the technical aspects weren't as bad. I don't remember the audio being nearly as poorly edited, but there's still like no compelling plot that makes up for the bad filmmaking technique and like really shitty CGI. And the first movie was kind of like it was picked up by the so bad it's good like cult classic community. So in the second movie, it's arguable how much of it the director was doing seriously and how much of it he was doing like, oh, you liked how bad it was last time, let's make it worse kind of thing. But I don't know. That's up for you to analyze. Actually, I take that back. Don't analyze it. Don't watch these movies. My third worst watch of 2024 is Inherent Vice by Paul. What's his name? Paul Thomas Anderson? And I'm going to be so real with you right now. I could not tell you a single thing that happened in this movie. It's supposed to be like this stoner comedy slash crime drama situation. But honestly, it was just like bored and unmotivated. And it wasn't like, if you're going to do a stoner comedy, first of all, it's probably not going to be incredible. But you have to like commit to the stoner comedy. And it didn't commit to stoner comedy. It was just like, he was just high all the time and like acted wacky once in a while. But then it was also this like crime drama. I don't know. The genre of it didn't do it any favors. I watched this movie in Cinema Club as well, and there were maybe 15 people there at the beginning of the screening. By the end, there was 5 people left, and out of the 5 of us, not a single one of us enjoyed the movie. So that makes me think that maybe this isn't that unpopular of opinion. But I gave it 2 stars, and I gave it 2 stars and not something lower because like on a technical aspect, like it was filmed well, because like Paul Thomas Anderson's like a famous director. Like he's made big budget movies. He knows how to make a movie. It's just like this was a bad one. And with that, we've been through all of my 5 and 4.5 star rated film viewings from 2024. Remember, this is just my opinion on how these movies connected with me personally. If there's a movie that I really connected with that was like a 4.5 or 5 star and you didn't like it, that's fine. I mean, like, I'd have some words with you, but it's fine. Likewise, if for some god unknown reason you just love the Birdemic series and those are your favorite movies and you watch them all the time, I'm so happy for you. I will never personally be partaking. So I hope you guys liked me yapping about movies for like God knows how long, probably over half an hour. And like I said, I'm going to be making a video about all of us strangers. Do I want to commit to a time? Let's say we'll give me a good range from a week to a month, I think, is when that will be out. But also, if a month rolls around and it's not out, don't be mad. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video and dealing with my yapping. I'll see you in the next video, hopefully. Bye.